Welcome to the Brittany Hughes Show, everybody. Happy Thursday to you. Well, hell must have officially frozen over because leftists have found a migrant that they don't like. And this is after ringing the dinner bell for millions of illegal aliens to come into this country, including gangbangers and criminals, human traffickers, people who have already been deported from the United States, people with criminal histories in the United States and in their home countries, and of course, the plain old illegal alien who, perhaps isn't a murderer or a member of MS-13 or whatever, but whose first act upon coming to this country is to declare that they don't give the furry end of a rat's behind about the laws that govern it. And all of this was perfectly acceptable to liberals. We are to welcome endless droves of migrants with open arms. Doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter where they come from, doesn't matter how many of them there are. Unvetted refugees from countries that hate us, illegal aliens who don't have any respect for the laws of the country they're demanding to be let into, doesn't matter. Everyone is welcome, can't turn anybody away. But when President Donald Trump allowed a measly 59 white South Africans to come into the United States in order to flee racial violence in their home country because their farms are being stolen and burned and their lives are being threatened because they are white, that was apparently a bridge too far for liberals, who suddenly found themselves with this big problem with migration and started asking, wait a second, why do these people need to come here? Why can't they go somewhere else? Which is a complete 180 from the line they were peddling about 2 seconds ago. So now for background here, these are the folks who landed at Dulles International Airport on Monday night. You can see it's largely families, nicely dressed moms and dads with their kids, toddlers, all waving American flags, which of course the left absolutely hates, right? They love burning the American flag. They love trampling the American flag. They love migrants who trample our National Guardsmen while waving foreign flags. Remember when a group of migrants under the Biden administration actually tried to attack border agents with a giant Venezuelan flag? That's perfectly fine with leftists. It's totally fine to launch riots in the streets of American cities and clog up intersections to protest Trump deporting criminal aliens with rap sheets as long as your arm, all while waving Mexican flags or Salvadoran flags, flags of the countries that are so poor and so violent and so corrupt and so just god-awful that you had to swim the river to the United States, but for some reason you're still waving them here while demanding your right to stay in the country that you illegally invaded. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. You would think that if you wanted to stay in America so bad and declare your love and loyalty to this country, you'd be waving an American flag. Apparently not. But here are a relative few white South Africans. I mean, we're talking about 59 people. I think it was 23 individual families compared to the 10 million or so illegal aliens the Biden administration let roll through the back door. All of them waving American flags, all having filled out paperwork to come here legally, all having been vetted, all coming in through an official port of entry. Now, you can't tell entirely from these photos, but none of them that I see appear to have gang tattoos scrawled like billboards across their foreheads. And this is who leftists lost their minds over. Because, see, these are not the non-white, non-English speaking, need the government to solve all their problems, future Democrat voting migrants the left is looking for. These people didn't fit the bill. And it was almost hilarious to watch the very thinly veiled mask come off and see all of these abjectly racist leftists just go apoplectic over these people being fast-tracked as refugees, which the Trump administration did because the issue of white farmers in South Africa being persecuted and targeted because of their race and their ancestry has been long ignored despite being well documented. The history of violence against white South African farmers is a long-standing issue and one that the world has known about for quite some time. The media don't want you to know that. They like to gaslight you into believing that this is something that had never been heard about before, and they're in a full-on campaign to deny that white farmers are being targeted and beaten and killed over their race. Here's Anderson Cooper earlier this week saying, like it was absolute gospel carved in stone, that there is in fact no genocide against white farmers in South Africa.
The idea that there's a genocide of white farmers going on in South Africa is just not true. It's absurd. And that's been debunked by a number of organizations, both inside and outside of South Africa.
So now that's the line they're going with, okay? And to support this, the same media who told us that Joe Biden's mental faculties were in order and that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation and that, face masks would protect you from COVID and the 150 other lies they've been peddling for the last 10 years and beyond, they cite the South African government, which says, no, white farmers aren't being targeted here. That's not true. And apparently we're just supposed to buy that. Because, why would a government ever lie about anything ever, right? It's a mystery. But that's not what Democrats were saying 2 seconds ago, by the way. Here's John Fetterman, who is a Democrat senator back in 2023, calling out the South African government for having a problem with the supposed genocide of Palestinians in Gaza when Israel decided to defend itself against a terrorist attack. And the South African government came out against that genocide, but apparently they have no problem with white people being robbed and murdered in their own country.
Who are they really fighting? It's a group of cowards. They hide in tunnels. They hide behind civilians. They attack, kill, and mutilate children, women, and they do that? Stop talking about proportion on that. They shot their best shot on October 7th, and they would have taken more lives if they couldn't do that, but they couldn't do it. And now let's also talk about that. Now we're talking about genocide, and now South Africa is bringing that kind of a trial. Maybe South Africa being able to sit this one out when they're talking about criticizing the behavior. Sit it out.
So this is something Democrats have known about. This is something the world has known about. This is not some big mystery, okay? And furthermore, beyond that, here's Julius Malema. This is a politician in South Africa. He's a communist. He's the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Kind of sounds like the Socialist Workers' Party, if you recall. And here is Julius Malema at a political rally openly encouraging people to go out and target and kill white South African farmers.
Shoot to kill the mother, kill the poor, the farmer, kill the poor, the farmer.
Kill the Boer. Kill the white farmer. In the name of revolution, in the name of social justice, this is the only way that we can achieve our goal. We have to go out and we have to target these people on the basis of their race and their ancestry, and we have to kill them. That is what he openly called for. The next day, 24 hours after that speech, a 79-year-old white South African farmer named Theo Becker was brutally murdered in his own home. 4 black men came into his home around breakfast time and attacked Becker and his wife. They beat him with an iron bar stolen from his own farmhouse so badly that it caved in his skull, and then they slit his throat and left him to bleed out on the floor. And then they beat his wife Marlinda and put a plastic bag over her head with the intent to suffocate her to death. And miraculously, she managed to survive. So Minister Johan Bauer, who is the pastor who led the funeral services for Becker, his wife, Retha, said this: "We have been terrified by Theo's murder. Sometimes we Afrikaners feel like running from South Africa, but it is the only country we know where we were born." This is not a hoax. The white farmers in South Africa are well aware of this problem. This is a well-documented issue. Theo Becker's story is one of many documented stories of this type of racially based violence. This is not some conspiracy theory. These are actual people whose lives and livelihoods are being systemically targeted because they are white, and because the left, which is a global cancer that exists far beyond the United States, has decided that all white people are evil, all descendants of European settlers must pay, that we, by virtue of our skin color, owe the rest of the world whatever they demand of us as penance for coming in and stealing the land that they were already stealing from each other well before white folks ever showed up on the scene, by the way. And then you couple that unmitigated violence with the fact that the South African government last year passed the Expropriation Act, which allows the government to confiscate land, oftentimes without any compensation whatsoever, when it is unused, or when the government decides that it is in the public's best interest to redistribute it. because white South Africans make up only about 7% of the population, but they own about 70% of the farmland. And this is a holdover from apartheid, in part because of a law passed more than 100 years ago that banned black people from owning land in South Africa. But it's worth noting here that the white farmers who currently live on that land and work it, and who had nothing at all to do with that law, have ancestry in South Africa that dates back in many cases 400 plus years to the Dutch settlers who colonized South Africa, because before they and the other Europeans showed up, Africa was not countries. Okay, it was nothing more than a savage wasteland of warring tribes that slaughtered and conquered and killed one another and sold each other into slavery on the regular. See, the left doesn't like to talk about that. Right? They want us to believe their revisionist history that paints this ridiculous picture wherein all white people were always the evil villains and the non-white natives were just sitting there peacefully smoking the peace pipe and holding hands and singing Kumbaya in the daisy fields before all of the evil colonialists showed up. And white people, of course, invented slavery. Nobody was ever doing it before white people. We came up with that all on our own. And pointing out that African tribes, like Native American tribes, like South African tribes, were brutal, bloodthirsty barbarians does not exactly fit this rosy narrative they want to paint of these peaceful indigenous tribes just being bowled over by violent, germ-ridden white people. But these white South Africans, in truth, are innocent people who own land that their families have lived on and cultivated for centuries. It's where they were born. It's the only thing that they know. And now they are the targets of race-based violence and government discrimination because the idea is that white people in Africa, they're not actually African, right? Despite their 400-year-old ancestry there, they don't really count. And African land should be turned back over to black Africans, forcibly and violently if necessary, and somehow this is justice. Somehow this is good. This is right. And if the white people there don't want to get murdered or have their land forcibly taken from them and redistributed by the government in the name of social justice, well, they should just go back to Europe. Right? Why do they need to come here? They should go back to Europe. This was the argument that was actually made on CNN by a former Biden-Harris staffer named Ashley Allison when she said that white people who feel unsafe in South Africa should just go back to their homeland, which she then proceeded to get wrong because she doesn't actually know history.
People who are native to that land deserve their rightful land back. That is not what the Afrikaners actually want to have happen, which are the white Africans. And so who are not originally from Africa, who colonized South Africa also. And so that is what they are saying is discrimination. Now, if the Constitution in South Africa is discriminatory, they have their checks and balances in that land, just like we do. And that is for them to, so if the Afrikaners don't actually like the land, they can leave that country.
They are. They're leaving to come here.
No. They can
These refugees are coming here.
They can actually leave and go to where their native land is, which is probably Germany.
Are you against them coming here?
Holland, probably. Holland.
So these people are not from Germany. They're not from Holland either. They're from South Africa. They are South Africans. They've lived in South Africa their whole lives. Their ancestors lived in South Africa. But if you look back at their entire lineage, if you go back more than 400 years, it does originate in Holland, just like Native Americans can trace their ancestry back to Mongolia and East Asia. At some point, everybody migrated to somewhere from somewhere. Nobody just sprung up out of the field like daisies, okay? Everybody is from somewhere else if you go back far enough in their ancestry. There is nobody that is just inherently native to the United States of America, to Africa. I mean, if you look back, regardless of which version of the start of human history you believe in, we all trace everything back to Mesopotamia. Okay, so nobody in any other part of the world is actually native to that area. You migrated, your people migrated from somewhere. All right, so for these people in particular, it's Holland. And look, you know, in fact, if it's good, if it's right, if it's logical to say that white South Africans who feel unsafe in South Africa, you know, can just go back to Holland where they've never actually lived, then frankly, by that logic, Latinos who feel unsafe in their Central American countries can just go back to Spain. I mean, that's where the vast majority of their ancestry comes from. The majority of Latinos in Central American countries are not indigenous. I can tell you, as someone who lived and traveled in Central and South America for more than 2 years, I can tell you firsthand, the truly indigenous residents of those countries are treated like second-class citizens. In the cities, they're the ones who are begging on the streets. As a matter of fact, in many places, in remote villages where the indigenous people actually live, many of them don't even speak Spanish. The men might speak it as a trade language, but the women do not. They speak their indigenous language. Most Latinos, what we would generally think of as Venezuelans or Mexicans or Salvadorans or whatever, they are the descendants of Spanish colonizers, and they have heavily mixed heritage at best. So why the heck are they coming here to flee violence in their home country? Just go to Spain. That's where they're from, by Ashley Allison's logic here. But see, that's different. That's different. And we all know why. Because they're brown people, and these are white people. And the left has adopted this underlying assumption, the bedrock of their entire ideology, that says that white people are inherently evil and must be punished for all of the perceived injustices that they have perpetrated on the poor, pitiful rest of the victimized world, even if that means racially and overtly discriminating against them and punishing them simply because they are white. And that ideology, that toxic, cancerous ideology, is being adopted even by some of our more mainstream institutions. The Episcopal Church's charity that deals with refugee assistance in the United States is now refusing to help relocate and resettle these white South African families because they are white South African families. This is the Episcopal Migration Ministries, which has partnered with the federal government for more than 4 decades and has helped resettle more than 110,000 refugees fleeing violence and persecution in their home countries. And after all of that, after more than 40 years of successful partnership with the federal government, after helping tens of thousands of other migrants, including illegal aliens who came here in open violation of U.S. law, the charity funded by the Episcopal Church now says that it will not help these families and will be ending its relationship with the federal government because they cannot bring themselves to help a few dozen white people. Because apparently people being forced out of their homes and murdered because of the color of their skin is not a good enough reason for the Episcopal Church to put them on any kind of priority list. Here is Presiding Bishop Sean Rowe telling ABC News that it was painful to watch these families be given what he calls preferential treatment over other migrants, and he says this is not who the Episcopal Church is or what they stand for.
We can't be ourselves in the Episcopal Church and take the step of resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa. Our church has a long commitment to racial justice and reconciliation, and we have historic ties with the Anglican Church of South Africa. Desmond Tutu is a part of, been a partner was a partner in this work for us. So we're just not able to take this step. It's not in line with anything that we're about.
Because 59 white people were allowed into the United States. That's all it took. But while the Episcopal Church is, denying aid to certain refugees on the basis of their skin color, here's who they are helping, okay? Here's who the left wants to allow into this country in droves, with or without vetting them. Doesn't matter who they are. We're not even allowed to ask. Here's who the media are actively stumping for, even as they turn their noses up at a few dozen, white people coming in from South Africa to flee racial violence. Here's who they support. Human traffickers who drag children they're not related to across the border to use them as golden tickets into the United States, sex traffickers who exploit women and children, drug traffickers who pump our streets full of fentanyl and other illicit drugs that have led to record numbers of overdoses in this country, murderers, rapists, thieves, drunks who have no qualms getting behind the wheel of a car and driving without a valid driver's license and blowing through a stop sign and T-boning a minivan and killing everybody in it. All of which are documented incidents regularly in this country. And this is in addition to the millions of illegal aliens who might not come here with the intent to harm anybody, but who instantly overwhelm our social welfare programs because they don't come here with marketable skill sets or a job lined up, any way to support themselves or a place to live. They come here instantly dependent on the American taxpayer to support them in everything from their shelter to their clothing to their food to their children's education, who then get put into taxpayer-funded schools. They don't speak a word of English, and now they are going to suck up tens of thousands of dollars in taxpayer resources each in ESL classes to help them catch up on English. They are placed in classrooms based on their academic level, which often is far behind where they should be based on their age. So then you have older migrant children being put in classrooms with younger American children, which creates all kinds of problems, as you might expect. This is who the left wants to let in by the millions, with no limit whatsoever, no controls, just open the floodgates, because these poor, pitiful people don't want to live in their crap-splat country anymore, and we should allow them to come here, no questions asked. It is worth noting, by the way, that while all of these South Africans being allowed to come into this country, the left is screaming about them, while illegal aliens are being turned away at the border by the Trump administration, it's worth noting that as much as the left likes to pretend that the word asylum is just a catch-all word for anybody who wants to come here for any reason whatsoever, persecution on account of one's race or ethnicity is an actual legally legitimate qualifier for asylum under our current immigration law. I know the left wants to pretend that those laws don't actually exist, but according to our current law, if you are specifically targeted in your home country on account of your race or your nationality or your political affiliation or your religion, that qualifies you to seek asylum in the United States. Now, saying my country is an economic hellhole and we've got gangs out the wazoo qualifies you for an awful lot of my sympathy, but it's not a legal qualifier for asylum. As a matter of fact, it just sounds like Chicago. White South Africans fleeing race-based violence in their home country fits with an actual reason to seek asylum legally in the United States, which is what they did. A Salvadoran wanting to come here to get a better job is understandable, but it's not a legal qualifier for asylum. But see, the left wants us to believe that Americans born in the United States, who can date their ancestry back to the Pilgrims or the settlers at Jamestown, we're not real Americans because we stole this land from the natives, right? And white South Africans whose family have lived in South Africa for 400 years, they're not really South Africans. That doesn't qualify. That doesn't count. But the illegal alien who hopped the border yesterday, whose clothes are still wet from the Rio Grande, who didn't even come over here with a pot to pee in, he's as American as apple pie, and we're not allowed to send him home because this is his home. And we should just let him stay. Even if he's a known criminal, doesn't matter. I mean, Democrats are sending delegations of taxpayer-funded congressmen to El Salvador to visit a verified MS-13 gangbanger in a prison for terrorists to make sure that he's doing okay, that he feels safe and has everything he needs, because they are so irate that the Trump administration is kicking out violent criminals, wife beaters, gangbangers. That is who they are actively fighting to keep in this country. It is absurd. I mean, this is who they believe we should allow into this country without barely so much as a hi, how you doing, instead of carefully vetted, racially persecuted white immigrants. A 15-year-old member of Tren de Aragua's Little Devils group, which are basically a bunch of juvenile criminals affiliated with this transnational criminal enterprise that's now taking over apartment complexes and neighborhoods in America. A 15-year-old member of Tren de Aragua's Little Devils group, which are basically a bunch of juvenile criminals associated with this transnational criminal enterprise that's now taking over apartment complexes and neighborhoods in America. A 15-year-old Tren de Aragua member was arrested in Staten Island this week after he allegedly robbed a 16-year-old autistic boy. So this kid is an illegal alien from Venezuela. He already has at least a dozen arrests to his name, despite the fact that he is only 15 years old. He's part of a crew that calls themselves in English the Devils of 42nd Street. People say, or police say, that they are responsible for victimizing dozens of people at this point. It's really hard for law enforcement to hold them accountable because unless they commit a truly heinous crime like murder, New York City does not typically prosecute juvenile criminals. There are at least 40 kids known to be in this crew, including illegal alien children as young as 11 years old. Their MO is carrying out mob robberies and assaults in Midtown and the surrounding area. Basically, they just overwhelm their victims with sheer numbers. And Tren de Aragua uses them because they know kids are going to fly under the radar. The city is not going to prosecute them. They can rob and assault at will, and nobody is going to do anything. And these gangs are not stupid, okay? They might be violent animals, but they're not so dumb as to not figure out how to exploit the very obvious loopholes in the laws in these bleeding heart democratic cities. And so this kid's case is going to get booted over to family court, which is sealed. None of it is made public. We're not going to know what happens. And the worst penalty he's going to get is probably a slap on the wrist, if that. And this happens over and over and over again. And this is reportedly after he attacked and punched and kicked a disabled teenager before robbing him blind. This kid came back home black and blue, according to his mother. He's now traumatized, as you would expect. But this is exactly who the left has spent the last 4 years and beyond that, dating all the way back to the Obama administration, with a slight reprieve under the first Trump administration. This is who the left spent years allowing to come into this country by the millions under the guise of compassion and inclusivity and diversity. And if you had anything to say about it, if that was concerning to you at all, you were just a racist who must not like brown people. No, I don't like criminals. I don't like gangbangers. I don't like people who come here in open violation of our laws and spit in our faces and then demand that we foot the bill for their entire lives. I don't like criminals who come here and terrorize our cities and the law-abiding people, including legal immigrants who live in them. I will absolutely, every single day and twice on Sunday, take a nicely dressed, well-skilled, law-abiding white family standing in an airport waving an American flag, grateful to be allowed into this country to start a better life, over a brown-skinned person who hopped a border fence, assaulted an agent, and then plopped down in El Paso waving a foreign flag, telling us that they're here to stay and there is nothing we can do about it. I will 100% take that trade. And it has nothing at all to do with the color of either of their skin. Don't care about that whatsoever. It 100% has to do with respect for the country that is graciously allowing you in and giving you a home. Respect for the other people who live here. And for the continued survival of a civilized society that has to be grounded in law and common sense, of which we appear to have less and less these days. And with that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you back here next Thursday. In the meantime, head over to the Apple Podcast Store, hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. That way you won't ever miss an episode. You can also subscribe to the Newsbusters podcast with Tim Graham. That one's on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I will see you guys back here next week. And in the meantime, have a great week ahead and a blessed weekend.